Okay, we're gonna go through some kind of troubleshooting steps you can take if you're having any issues with your salmon tank. We do go into way more detail in your Salmon Tank Manual and even break it down into like fish are dying, water's dirty, that kind of stuff. So please look at your Salmon Tank Manual. But right now I'm just gonna show you a few of the steps that are really common that you might wanna take if you have any issues with your tank at all. So the first thing, if I'm having issues with my fish, seem like they're dying, they're like behaving weird, anything like that, I'm going to check the chiller. Because salmon are really, really sensitive to temperature changes. Now the chiller will move up and down about 3 degrees from your set temperature. So to check your set temperature, again, each model of chiller is a little bit different, but typically they have a button that says set and you can just press it to see what it is. And if you have it set to the wrong thing, you can move it down or up. I think 47 is pretty good. That's about as cold as I would like it. I typically set tanks to about 48, 49 degrees there. So you check your set temperature, and then once it stops blinking, it'll tell you what temperature your actual water is. Now my tank is really high because I just set it up for training purposes. Your tank should again stay somewhere within 3 degrees of about your set temperature. So it should be close to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Once it starts getting closer to 60 or above 60, that is really dangerous for salmon. So if you happen to see that your tank is a high temperature, it's also a good idea if you have an external thermometer, because sometimes the chilled water might be cold, but the tank water could be warmer if you're having a malfunction with your chiller there. But if you happen to notice that you're having some sort of water temperature issue, either by the display temperature, you can even just like stick a hand in there and you're like, okay, that is not anywhere near as cold as it needs to be for the fish. The first thing you want to do is check your hoses that are coming in and out of the chiller. If they have like a really big like corkscrew or a kink in them, it can make it so the water's just not moving fast enough to be chilled. So this again is about as much of a curve as I would like in this line. I wouldn't like it to be much more than that. And then back here as well. So I'm just double checking that there's no kink there. If there is, you can kind of move these tubes around. The hose connections can kind of bend, so you can make it so it's a little less of a spiral there. They also can kind of move on here. So you can just sort of reposition things and see if that works. You also, if you have a really high temperature, if you're getting into like 60 degrees or higher, you want to cool this water fast. So there's a couple ways you can do that. You can add ice to your water, ice packs. Or you can change out some of the water and replace it with really cold water if you have like access to really cold hose water, or if your faucet runs really cold. So if your tubes are all good and you're not sure why your chiller is running high, it could be the air filter in here might be clogged. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna leave your filter running, and you're gonna either turn off your chiller if you have an off switch, or this one is an old model that doesn't have an off switch, so I'm gonna unplug it. Now this just means that the chiller isn't running anymore, but water is still running through it, through the spray bar, so the filter is okay to stay on. If for any reason you needed to turn this off, then you would want to stop the filter as well, but you shouldn't have to do that. So now that I have it off, again, each chiller is a little bit different, but on most models, there are these little buttons somewhere kind of on the bottom of the side, and you're gonna press it and kind of pull, and see it should just pop off a little bit, and then there's one on this side, and then it sticks on the top, so you're just gonna kind of release it. And then right here is an air filter. And on most of the models, you can kind of just slide these off. They just kind of hook on these little screws here, and you can slide it off. And if this was really, really dirty, so you can still see through it really well, you wanna wipe it down with like a microfiber cloth or even vacuum it. You might need to clean this part off as well if it got really dirty, but then you want to make sure this is clean. Those are typically the most common issues that you have with a chiller, is either a kinked tube or a blocked air filter. And to put it back on, you just kind of snap it in place there. And so once that's all clean, the tubes are all good, then you can either turn it on if it's got a switch, or plug it back in like mine, because it's an older model. So it just takes a sec to get going there. There we go. And again, that shows the actual temperature, and then I'll just double check the set temperature is, I changed it to 48 degrees. So again, those two things are the most common issues that you're gonna have with your chiller. Anything more than that probably means that it's like actually broken and we might need to get a replacement. So now I'm going to talk about some issues with your filter. And there's a couple different things here. One could be if air got into your filter, and you can usually tell because there's a loud rattling sound. Right now it's just making kind of a quiet hum, usually not very disturbing, but if you're hearing a rattling sound, that usually means that there's an air bubble in here. That also usually means that water will not be coming out of the spray bottle, okay? So right now our tank is working well, but we're gonna pretend for a sec that we're hearing a rattling sound. So one way that air can get into your filter is if your intake basket is really dirty, like ours is, because ours has some algae from last year that it's still filtering through. That can mean that your filter's working really hard and it can kind of create an air bubble in there. So what you would want to do, I just have a paper towel, you can have a rag or something like that. My hands are pretty clean, so I'm just gonna stick my hand in there and kind of wipe off some of this stuff. It's okay if some of it ends up back in there, but just give it a good wipe. Try and catch as much of it as you can in your rag. You can also, if there's little bits that you knock off that are floating around, use an aquarium net. So that can help there. So you wipe that off, and then you can kind of try and just gently rock this back and forth. So what that would mean is if there was an air bubble stuck down here, it'll float up to the top and be able to work itself out. So you can just kind of gently rock this back and forth, give it a couple tries, and see if that rattling sound stops and then water comes out of the spray bar freely. If that doesn't happen, then you will need to turn off the chiller and the filter, so unplug them both, and then you will need to re-prime the pump, just as you did in step 3. So that's kind of what you do if you hear that rattling sound for an air bubble in the tank. So if you double checked and you didn't need to do any of that, maybe your filter says it's 48 degrees, you double checked it, it's super cold, and you're pretty sure it's not the chiller there. The next thing you're gonna wanna check is the water quality. That is probably the most common issue in general we see with the salmon tanks is water quality. Water quality is pretty easy to avoid issues. It's a lot harder to fix the issues. So that is why it's really important to stay up on your salmon tank maintenance by doing water changes at least every 2 weeks once you start feeding your fish. Every week is great as well. And then also scooping out dead fish and not overfeeding or scooping out uneaten food on the bottom of the tank. So those stuff, as it decays, can lead to spikes in water quality issues, which can be really detrimental to your fish. So if you suspect you have a water quality issue, there's a couple different ways you can test it. So this test is the test that we typically use. It's the most accurate test that I found, and I really like it because it's got these little vials, and you perform the water quality test. It also comes with a manual, so it explains how to do all the different tests in there. The things that we most often need to test for when we're worried about water quality are ammonia, nitrates, nitrites, pH. So those are the main ones that we really need to test for, and this kit has all of those in here. And then on the back it shows you what it should be, and typically, and it'll also tell you in the manual what the safe ranges are for the fish, but typically low is better, except for pH we want it to be pretty like neutral. So it'll tell you what we need it to be, and it'll tell you how much of these solutions you add per water from the tank in these vials. Again, it explains it all in there, but this is a really, really nice test kit. I think they're about $30 or so. These are also eligible for the Pets in the Classroom grant. So if you apply for that grant, you can get these through Petco or PetSmart and use that grant there. So this one is really, really great. Now, if you are, if you don't have this test kit, or you're on a time crunch, or just have funding issues, these tests are test strips. They are cheaper. They are less accurate, but they are still better than nothing, and still I highly recommend keeping them in your kit. I prefer the 7-in-1 test strips. The pet store didn't have them today, so this one tests for pH, nitrate, nitrite, and then these are kind of water hardness. They're not as big of an issue, but the other big one that we need to test for is ammonia, so I have a separate test strip. So ammonia, nitrates, nitrites, and pH, again, are the big ones. And so these ones are really simple. Again, they'll also kind of have a range and tell you what the safe range is for fish. You can also look it up if it's confusing. And they just have little test strips, and they'll have instructions for how long, but typically you dip it in the water for like 2 seconds, and then you just hold it up and read it, and it'll let you know if the water is safe or not. If you see a spike in any of these things, either from this kit or this one or the separate ammonia one, then you want to perform a water change, which will be explained in another video, which we'll link in the description here. Now, another issue, if you have extremely bad water quality, I know we've had some issues with automatic feeders dumping way too much food into the tank in the past. So if you have really murky water, or if your water quality test is like way out of the safe ranges for fish, it might be helpful to rinse your filter media. So if you need to do that, or if you're worried about it and think that it might be good to do that, you're going to, again, unplug and turn off your chiller and your filter. And then you would turn the valves here into the off position. So right now they're on, you would turn them this way to get into the off position. So off right there. So you would turn them off, everything's unplugged, and then you would take your filter. You can remove the lid. The lid will drip, so I like to take the lid off. I'm not gonna actually do it right now just because our filter's still working, but you would just take the lid off and put it over a bucket here, and then you could just dump the water from the canister into a bucket as well, and then you would just take those baskets out and rinse that filter media with clean water. So you just kind of rinse them. If there's gunk on there, you can even rinse the canister itself if it's really dirty. It shouldn't be that dirty, but you give those a rinse, and then you just reassemble everything as we explained in videos 2 and 3 of putting the filter all together there.